We're going to go through a hip external rotation, PAILS and rails setup using the box. So for this exercise, okay, there's quite a few variables you can play with. How it's going to work is I'm going to put my leg onto the box here. So variables I can play with are how much of the leg I have up on here. I could slide back a little bit more, taking more of my leg off the box. I could play with exactly where my back leg is in terms of standing, how much I close or open my knee here. Even maybe a bit of rotation coming from the knee might affect how things feel. And then also I could play with how I shift weight onto my pelvis. So I could shift weight more towards my left, which will very much change how this whole hip area gets loaded. I could shift weight a little bit more towards my right side, which again will change. It won't take things completely off, but it may change how that whole stretch sensation begins to feel. So you can play with moving from side to side with the weight distribution. I could also play with rotating my torso, which essentially I'm trying to turn my pelvis or rotate my pelvis. And then that will also change how things feel. Okay, then in order to get into the stretch, what I want to think about doing first is anteriorly tilting my pelvis. So if my pelvis was like a ball of water, I want to pour water out of the front of the pelvis, think lift the tailbone up. By doing that alone, it gives me a very nice stretch here already. And then I can explore the stretch, lower myself down, see how it feels. As I lower myself down, that should increase the stretch. I can then move to the side a little bit and explore, try to figure out where I have a good line of tension. While I'm down here, I could also play with maybe bending the knee, shifting the weight from side to side. If I'm not feeling very comfortable, maybe moving the leg a little more off the box. So you can play with those variables also while you're down here. And then once you've found a good stretch, I just want you to kind of stay there passively for the stretch while I explain the PAILS and rails. So the PAILS contraction is going to be to resist the box. Two movements to think about: hip extension, so driving the leg down, okay, and also internal rotation, so rotating into the box. And then the opposite contraction is going to be hip flexion, to bring the knee up towards the ceiling or in towards you and promote more external rotation. So that movement right there. So you can almost imagine that there's a scale underneath your knee or your ankle when trying to do the rails contraction, and you want to get light under those scales. So I'm going to run you through an example round of this PAILS and rails exercise. One thing I didn't mention is also, if you feel you set up, maybe you're here, the knee's quite high, you're not very comfortable, get something like a nab mat, a rolled up towel, rolled up yoga mat to kind of cushion here as well if you want. Okay, so what I want you to do is set yourself up. And then once you've found that line of tension, the idea is to get comfortable for the passive stretch. So I would assume that we've spent a couple of minutes here now holding the passive stretch. What I would then do is take a deep breath in, take a good brace. So I want to build tension around my leg, around my upper body before I begin. And then I'm going to start at 20%. So I'm going to think push down into the box, but I'm also thinking internally rotating the box. And that is coming from this whole deep hip region. I'll build that 20 to 40, 60, 80, and then to my safest, greatest effort, and then I will hold that for 20 seconds. While I'm holding for 20 seconds, I'm trying not to let that effort drop. I'm trying to keep it consistent. I'm trying to make sure I have full body tension as well. And then after my 20-second hold, I'm going to do the opposite. So imagine the scale underneath the knee, underneath the ankle. You want to get light underneath those scales. So I'm going to start to pull the leg in towards me, but I'm also thinking externally rotate the hip. So it's almost like the scale underneath the ankle should start to read lighter, because my intention is also to try and get this ankle towards this opposite shoulder. And I'm holding that effort as best as I can. If you had a stretch performing the PAILS contraction for the rails, it's almost like you're trying to hold on to that stretch sensation and not let those tissues relax or shorten. And then also holding for 20 seconds, after which I begin to soften and I lower myself down into the passive stretch. Again, that could be a play with anteriorly tilting the pelvis a bit more, with lowering the torso. For round 2, you may realize the stretch moves, it changes, so you may want to explore with the micro movements of turning your torso, rotating, shifting weight onto your pelvis, changing the knee angle, moving your body slightly to find a good line of tension for your consecutive rounds.